Hi, Daniel.
Good to see you, Wendy.
Keep track of all the faces. Yeah.
Congratulations on your new book.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's cool to be at this point.
You know, I just heard the other day that Innisfree closed down, which is where I actually met you.
Yeah, Innisfree and now Book Bar in Denver. So
What?
yeah.
Oh,
So continuing struggles, right, for independent bookstores and our cultural economic context, sadly.
that's so sad. Yeah.
But
That's heartbreaking.
at least we have the internet and the Able Muse online bookstore to buy books.
That's good.
William. Haley's here.
Hey, Haley. Hey. I am a big fan of Haley.
She's hilarious.
She really is.
Well, it's a little bit after 3, so why don't we get going? I'm going to mute all, and if you need to unmute, if you're reading, for instance, you can unmute yourself. Okay, so here goes. So welcome to today's last Able Muse Press reading of this season. It will resume sometime in the new year. And I'm John Philip Drury. My 4th book was published by Able Muse in 2015, Sea Level Rising, and new one's being published next fall, The Teller's Cage. So I'm delighted to host today's reading. And we have a triple book launch. The readers and poets are Nicole Caruso Garcia, who'll be reading from Oxblood, Janis Harrington, who's reading from How to Cut a Woman in Half, and Wendy Videlock, who will read from Wise to the West. Let me see. If you've been here before, you know about the chat feature. You can make comments, you can ask questions. After the poets have read, we'll have time for some questions and answers. Again, you can post things on the chat, and I'll try to keep track of things. But let's see what else. Also, Alex, I think, is going to post some links for ordering books, but you can always go to the Able Muse website.
I just posted them, John.
Oh, good. Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Well, let me hand it over to Alex right now. Oh, wait a minute.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, John.
I need to introduce you first. Let me hang on a second.
Okay,
I've got an introduction here. Let me introduce you. So we're going to Alex.
I can wait.
Yeah, that's okay. We're going to Alex Pepple. Alexander Pepple founded and edits Able Muse and Able Muse Press. And he also founded and directs the Erratosphere online workshop. His poetry and prose have been published or are forthcoming in Hopkins Review, Barrow Street, Rosebud, River Styx, American Arts Quarterly, Light, Think Journal, Euphony, Per Contra, Eclectica, Measure, and elsewhere. He edited the Able Muse anthology published in 2010. Those impressive credits led me to search for Alex's poems online, and I discovered 3 of them published in August 2022 in a wonderful new literary magazine that specializes in formal metrical poetry, Grand Little Things. I'd like to share Alex's 3rd poem there. The interruption loomed across high noon. Malfunction doomed them down by our playground. We scattered far enough as rotors wound, dust by the fray of commandos and goon, some hog-tied trudging, but towering rebel. Our flaring schoolyard wars dim to less consequence next to that witnessed march of brawn. Little Grace stood transfixed, braids streaked with sand. I moved in the maiden grip of her soft hand. Like our class lab experiments, our babble of cultures fizzed and hissed offhand to be a country scale refrain of bone on bone. Alex, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much, John. And that was a good surprise.
I thought it might be.
welcome everyone to another Able Muse authors reading. And this time we'll have a book launch from three of our talented poets, Wendy, Videlock, and Nicole, Caruso, Garcia, and Janis, Harrington, who all have brand new books launched by Able Muse Press. I've posted links in the chat where you can go to their websites and order books, or just go to the Able Muse Press website and they're all there. I'll also have to bring your attention to the fact that we'll be having a new issue of Able Muse, the print edition journal, coming out in a month or so. And so if you haven't subscribed, I recommend you do so. And there are also links for subscribing in the chat to that. And just for a preview of who will be there, we'll have a featured poet will be Mary Jo Slater, and she'll be interviewed by a brand new poetry editor, who is Stephen Camper. And we'll have poems from people like Gail White, Amy Glenn, who won this year's Able Muse Book Award, and Dan Campion, and a few others. And there'll also be fiction, stories, essays, and all that. And also we'll have a book review from one of our attendees here today, Susan McLean. So I recommend you subscribe so you don't miss a thing from that forthcoming brand new issue. And without further ado, I'll hand it off to John, who will get the proceedings going for today. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Alex. Nicole Caruso Garcia's full-length debut poetry collection is Oxblood, which was named a finalist for the Able Muse Book Award and the Richard Wilbur Award. Now is published by Able Muse Press, from which she will be reading today. Her work appears in Best New Poets, Mezzo Cammin, Rattle, Rhino, the anthologies Extreme Sonnets and Extreme Formal Poems, and elsewhere. She serves as Associate Poetry Editor at Able Muse and as an Executive Board Member at Poetry by the Sea, an annual conference in Madison, Connecticut. Born in New Jersey, she was raised there and in Connecticut, where she now resides. Visit her at NicoleCarusoGarcia.com. Please welcome Nicole.
Thank you, John. Appraisal. Once raped, you wear it daily. Learn to see the cut, the color, clarity, and carrot. Each time you try to square asymmetry, it cleaves, reveals another jagged facet. Fool, you think it fits inside one poem. No, map with calipers and microscope your story since you came to wear that stone. Flawed and heart-shaped, bluer than the hope. Since you must wear it, hone it with precision. Leave your wrists unslit, the blood unbled, to cut and polish sin to scintillation. Woman, rise up from the rhinestone dead. Yet what can cut a diamond? Nothing can, except the hardest substance known to man. That poem first appeared in Mezzo Cammin when it was edited by Kim Bridgeford, and this book is in memory of Kim. So I began with a poem that she had published, and I'll also end with a poem, I believe the first poem of mine she published in Mezzo Cammin about Snow White. The second poem is called Have You Ever Been a Victim of Violence? 11 reasons why I don't check yes. And it's actually dedicated to Dr. Leslie Goldstone Orley, who happens to be my gynecologist. And I have shown her this poem. Have you ever been a victim of violence? 11 reasons why I don't check yes. Because the box, once X'd, can't be undone. Because to check the box is like a sadder version of I voted. Because I'll disappoint my angel of a gynecologist. She'll ask me when, and see, I've kept the truth from her for years. Because, damn it, I resent the box just waiting there to ambush me again. Because I bristle at the label victim and survivor. Can't win, both dice are loaded. Because the waiting room is Starbucks busy. Because the box is no confessional. Because there is no exorcist on staff. Because don't ask me to concede a thing when it's already such a feet in stirrups, flashlight on my cervix kind of day. Because of women wearing crowns of thorns far thornier than mine. Because what grit I've got, I ration. Ghost ship. At a distance, candles guttering can look like party lights, the way a ghost ship might seem from shore. It may have seemed I was carousing. It may have hurt you seeing my illuminated decks, my painted flags livened by wind. Despair is so immaculate a plague. A healthy vessel still will float, although you pillaged all the spirit from its hold. A ship like that may run aground or wreck against the cliffs. Adrift between the quick and the dead, it is not sorry, does not love or hate. It lists. The next poem has a little epigraph. Poem's called Dear Reader. And the epigraph is from French essayist Roland Barthes' The Pleasure of the Text. Is not the most erotic portion of the body where the garment gapes, the intermittence of skin flashing between two articles of clothing, between two edges. It is this flash itself which seduces. Dear reader, you come to hear me come undone. The diction taut, then loose from my chameleon tongue. You sometimes wonder if it's fact, the friction of my lover's stubble where I'm stung. You gape at what the gaping might expose. What will my inky fingerprints betray? I lie sincerely. My words conceal, disclose no more, no less than paint or bronze or clay. Yet what I thought was simply ink grows thick and hardens, forged like opalescent stone or bee-flecked amber, set in a mosaic I can't stop. In truth, I'm not just shown in dishabille, however crude or sacred. Soon all I've offered God to you lies naked. To the undertaker. Undertaker, I have sought you. Hover close above My overtaker, faith shaker, was the man I loved. Sew my useless jaw together, drain my blood's scant volume. He moved as though my lips were stitched by all the days I'd loved him. Your devotion lasts 2 hours. Tend and wash my body. In merely minutes, he had made unholy, Holy Friday. Fill me with your reeking fluid, harsh, but not unkind. Preserve my body with your proof. His petrified my mind. Pack my cavities with gauze. Make pretty perjury. I thought I was a woman loved. I am an effigy. Paint my face so lifelike, they will marvel at my charms. Who's that makeup for? He asked. Gawkers now, and worms. O gentlemen of more respect, lay coins upon my eyes. He made me lesser than a whore, staked claim between my thighs. I was his would-be wife, and still you dressed me for the church. A gown of silken muslin for a carcass with no work. The next poem is the title poem of the book, Oxblood, and there's a little epigraph. Why will you take by force what you may obtain by love? From a 1609 speech by Chief Powhatan, as recorded by John Smith. Oxblood. Go to Shepler's on North First in Tucson. Buy yourself a pair of cowboy boots. You're East Coast, so the sales clerk won't attempt to sell you Tony Lama or Lucchese. She'll steer you toward a discontinued pair of Sanders, plain, just under $90. And when you hesitate, Cordovan? She'll gently pull the wadding from their throats, correcting you politely. These are goatskin, oxblood. Under other circumstances, brown or black would do, but it's a long walk back along a ledge of grief. These boots must testify. A diamond ring is neither branding iron nor fencing wire. Don't ask why take by force what you can have by love. Despite your Spartan fist, there's no redress. So take the oxblood, thank the lady for her help, and yes, you'd like to wear them home. For 8 years, wear them, staggered in between your goth phase, swing phase, punk, bohemian. They'll frisk you at the Guns N' Roses show, so tuck a can of mace inside the shaft. When trouble parks his Eldorado just to follow you on foot, remember this. Each arch contains an 18-gauge steel shank. And when the mud-scabbed soles are wearing thin, well, get them fixed. For $20, they'll look as good as Lazarus. For 8 more years, wear them in rain and snow and summer heat. Though late most afternoons, the light forgives, spills violet blue. One day, you must admit, although the leather still looks plummy, half the outsole stitching has dissolved like catgut, and the vamp is pulling free. Beyond repair, yet beautiful with brokenness. Retire them beneath the guest room bed, and in that kneeling, listen at the window to the swelling requiem of crickets. If you have done all this, then stand. At first, you'll feel no different. Yet the sun will strike within a copper sky that barefoot hour when all your scorpions have turned to sand. The next poem is called I Never Fell in Love with You, and it's for my husband. To fall in love implies a lack of choice, as if I were cartoonish, maladroit, and love an open manhole to avoid. To fall suggests a kind of loftiness, that I began in some exalted place, and not the area of my loneliness. To fall like rain or tears or mercury, a pawn of Cupid or of gravity. No, with my grappling hook, I climbed precisely. To fall kerplunk is stumbling imperfection. No, I would brave the hot tar of rejection to wear the ermine cloak of your affection. I built a trebuchet and aimed to sail beyond your moat, over your castle wall. I launched, I soared in love. I did not fall. And the last poem I'll read for you is Snow White's Plea to the Huntsman. Asleep, I shiver in a silken gown and wait for you to find me in the dark. Don't let me waken shackled to a crown, too drowsy to resist that royal mark. You saved me once and fooled the wicked queen who craved a lung and liver fricassee, yet served a hoax. She licked her fingers clean. By sparing me your sword, you captured me. Let moonlight vigil lead you to my lips and prove your kiss will break this spell's embrace. The prickly arrows of your cheek eclipse affection from the smoothest princely face. Such knaves can plunder castles, trinkets, art, but only you can breach my fortressed heart. Thank you.
Please feel free to unmute so we can all hear the applause. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you everyone for listening. And thank you to Alex and his whole team at Avril Muse for creating something that I love so much.
Thank you. Our next reader is
John,
yes, I'm sorry.
John, before you start, can I just tell everyone, I looked at the gallery view and looks like almost everybody's La Muchacho. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you that you can text that by going in the gallery view. And if you click on go to the top right of your box, you see the three dots there. If you click those boxes and go at the bottom and say click rename, you can change it to your real name. So La Muchacho.
Each person individually.
Yes.
Yes, good.
Okay, John, sorry for the interruption.
No, no problem, no problem. Our second reader is Janis Harrington. Janis's first book, Waiting for the Hurricane, won the Lena M. Schull Book Award from the North Carolina Poetry Society. Her poems have appeared in journals and anthologies, including Tar River Poetry, Journal of the American Medical Association, North Carolina Literary Review, and Beyond Forgetting, Poetry and Prose about Alzheimer's Disease. She was the runner-up for the White Pine Press Poetry Book Prize 2020. After living in Switzerland for many years, she and her husband returned to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Today, she's reading from her new poetry collection, a finalist for the 2020 Able Muse Book Award, How to Cut a Woman in Half. Please welcome Janis.
Thank you, John, for that introduction and also for being the host today.
You're welcome.
Nicole, your poems are powerful. I have your book, but it was wonderful to hear them in your voice. Wonderful reading.
Thank you.
I want to thank Alex for publishing my book and for his skillful editing. It was a pleasure, Alex, to go through that process with you. And thanks, Karina, for organizing today's reading. I'm delighted to do a three-way book launch with Wendy and Nicole. And thanks to everybody who's listening this afternoon. At least in North Carolina, it's afternoon. My book is a sequence of narrative sonnets. It tells the story of two sisters' devotion and loyalty to each other. In the primary story, the narrator supports her younger sister, Annie, in the weeks following her husband's sudden death. Witnessing Annie's sorrow cracks open the narrator's own unresolved grief about her husband's death many years before. It is a book about grief and loss, but it's also equally a book about healing and resilience. So I'll start with a poem that's a flashback to the 1960s when the two sisters were adolescents. And the title is a quotation from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. The sun for sorrow will not show his head. Define the bishop, his forbidden films list. Our aunt and her date took Annie and me, young teens, our notion of romance germinal. Our primary reference, our parents' tepid pecs, to a drive-in rerun of West Side Story. Curious, embarrassed by occasional front seat smooches, swept up by the giant screen technicolor passion of a modern Romeo and Juliet, we wept with Maria as Tony died in her lap, branding unwittingly our virginal hearts and adolescent psyches. As a toxin affects an embryo, did this early exposure to tragedy twine love with loss in our destinies? The next poem moves ahead to when the narrator and Annie are young adults. Outer Banks Harbinger. Ranger's hut boarded up, our choice of campsites. Car radio broken, far too dark to notice the dunes' sea oats blown flat, a red pennant. Newlywed Pete and I, Annie and her longtime boyfriend Nick, each of us ignorant. We struggle to pitch a mildewed family tent as the ocean roars and the wind gains force. All night, we huddle within canvas walls, snapping like loosed sails. Our youthful bodies, the only ballast. At dawn, storm spent, we unzip the flaps, astonished to be alive. Sure, God's grace has secured our futures. Soon, Annie and Nick will graduate, marry at last. My own husband will take a curve too fast. In the next poem I'll read, Annie and the narrator are middle-aged. One evening, the narrator receives a phone call with the news that Annie's husband, Nick, has taken his life. On the first flight out, easy to disbelieve at 30,000 feet. Oxygen thin, awake before dawn, surreal to see the Alps' icy peaks below me, not above. Crossing the North Pole to LAX, 11 hours incommunicado. I concoct a shock antidote. The call was a hoax. Unreal 2, palm trees, brazen sun, driving the I-5 south to San Diego. I ring and ring, but no response on my sister's end. Parked curbside, seeing her house serene, I feel the waking sleeper's relief, only a dream. But at her door, a florist vase, white on green, lilies and mums. A card with a black band, Annie's name scrawled by a stranger's hand. Bardo. Keep his things, play his music, leave lights on. Annie's Buddhist acupuncturist advises. Nick may come and go for 49 nights. Daily, they confer. Tsarina and Rasputin. Wary, I eavesdrop, want to warn charlatan. It can't be healthy, constant Tchaikovsky, or the staged pretense of Nick's non-absence. Brass lamps glow beside his chair, a glass of Chilean bread, book open to last page read. Available for his ethereal touch, razor on sink, towel on hook, socks curled in balls. And on their bed, unaided by sleeping pills, alert for a sign or caress, his wife. Denied a goodbye, left behind in this life. The narrator cancels her flight home and promises Annie that she'll stay with her until she can be alone. Minefield. The African gray parrot, dead-on mimic, calls to her in Nick's voice, keeps it up until Annie drops night on the cage. The doorbell can mean more flowers, or a neighbor with a crock pot, salad, and sourdough bread. The upbeat dental hygienist phones to book Nick's 6th-month recall visit. The Blockbuster account is in his name. Coming home, each time we're tricked for an instant by Nick's car in the garage. The classical FM station asks if, again this year, they can count on him. On the patio where he smoked Cuban cigars, the pottery ashtray fills with rain. Accompanying my sister to a suicide support group. Widowed, Annie perches on the folding chair, a wren on a window ledge, poised for flight. Her eyes fixed on the red poinsettia's petals, wilted in mid-January. Silent, head tilted, she seems to hear her new peers, these dazed strangers bound by a common wound, raw like hers, or loosely sutured by time. her turn to share. Lips quivering, she shrugs, passes, unable to shape sentences for the aftermath of a bullet's ragged exit through tissue and bone. Her elder, playground protector, fist tight in my lap. I want an enemy to fight. Nick's parents were Russian and suffered terribly during World War II. The next poem is about Nick's father. Russian Roulette, Ukraine, 1943. Escaped from the Stalag, he walked home. Weeks of stealthy nights, days sleeping in trees above prowling wolves, licking rain from leaves, eating foraged berries. Arrived, he hid in the woods beyond the hamlet's huddled houses, its cabbage patches and copper onion dome. Steps away from his mother, who feared he was dead, within scent of her cooking smoke. He tarried there as long as he dared, then left with nowhere to go. That year he faced 2 times a firing squad, and twice he defied the odds. Just a reprieve, patient for a generation, the bullet waited for his son. Suicidal ideation. Think of dark starlings, each a ringleader, invading your hanging backyard feeder. Magnets for their kind, they muster, rout more timid species from seed and suet. Fast and fertile breeders, they multiply. A flock of hundreds swells to thousands. Screeching and squawking rapacious hoodlums, they give no quarter and sing no harmony. No calm, no détente, nonstop attack. In waves like bombers, they dive and peck. Wing to wing, they block sun, moon, stars, finally blot out all light, transforming noon to midnight. No escape, a full eclipse of hope. He lingers on the earth plane. The Buddhist acupuncturist chides my sister for weeping, says her grief prevents her husband from loosening his attachment, keeps him near, desperate to comfort her. Off track in the intermediate state, Nick is stuck. His soul cannot incarnate. Ear to door, I hear Annie muffle sobs with a pillow to liberate her beloved from the limbo of their love. I imagine Nick beyond gravity, a Chagall figure, arm extended, gazing down from the cathedral ceiling's peak. Unable to touch Annie or to leave her, he floats, weightless as an astronaut, tethered by her tears and by his regret. Pet sitter. We circle, weary as boxers in a ring. Escaped from her cage, she flaps clipped wings, ruffles feathers layered like slate tiles, keeping her yellow irises on me. Step up. I extend a wooden spoon, afraid to put a finger near her beak's scimitar, recalling Annie's counsel. If she bites you, don't yelp. Parrots love drama. Drat her pets, a string of dysfunctional animals dating from our childhood. A cat who ate wool, heel-nipping dog, frogs, and covert gerbils reproducing wantonly in our closet. Love my sister, love her menagerie. I try a bribe of dried cranberries. I mentioned that the narrator had also lost her husband many years before. Single car accident. The empty child seat prompts a search party. Arm's length apart, rescue workers and neighbors who heard the crash step slowly, praying a toddler is not lost in these wet woods, was not ejected at impact like the driver, unconscious in the shrieking ambulance. Reckless with his own life, seatbelt unclasped, driving too fast for dusk and rain, this backroads slick blacktop. Surely he would have secured his son or daughter. Flashlight beams crisscross, careen from oak to redbud to pine, startling nesting birds and families of white-tailed deer. In unison, the men call out, fall silent, listen for the cries of a child who might be missing. I'll finish by reading the title poem. How to Cut a Woman in Half. Fate, a cruel magician, vanishes her husband, leaving her table with half as many plates, shower rack missing half its towels, bed half empty. The trick, after the blade falls, she shrinks herself into half of her former life. But is he truly absent? She wills each day's crawling hours to end, certain he waits in sleep's tempting garden. No hope of persuading her that dreams are merely pain's sleight of hand. Eventually, she will emerge on stage, appearing unharmed, performance complete. Does it matter what is illusion or real if, when she steps from grief's box, she feels whole? Thank you.
Please unmute. I think we can applaud audibly. Thanks, Janis. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Let's see. And if everyone can mute themselves again, that would be great. Our third poet is Wendy Videlock. And Wendy lives on the western slope of the Colorado Rockies with her husband and their assorted critters. Their human birds have long since flown the coop. She's been with Able Muse Press from the start. Her work appears in Poetry, Hudson Review, O Magazine, Dark Horse, the New York Times, Best American Poetry, Hopkins Review, and other venues. She recently won the Cantor Poetry Prize and is the 4-time recipient of the Keats Soul-Making Prize. Her previous books, Slingshots and Love Plums, The Dark New and Other Poems, an illustrated children's book, and Nevertheless, with an introduction by A.E. Stallings, are all available from Able Muse Press. Her collection of essays and Prosimetrum, The Poetic Imaginarium, A Worthy Difficulty, is available from Lithic Press. Today, she's reading from her new poetry collection from Able Muse Press, Wise to the West. Please welcome Wendy Videlock.
Thank you, John. What a wonderful group of people. I'm just delighted to be here. Janis, thank you for that reading. That was powerful. Nicole, beautiful work. I don't quite know how to follow. I was going to read funny poems, but they don't seem, this doesn't seem in order. And it's great to see so many poets that I admire. Claudia, I see out there, and William, and Daniel, and Susan, and Jan Schreiber. And I know I have been with Able Muse from the start. This is my 4th book with Able Muse, Wise to the West. My publishing story begins with Able Muse, and what an honor it's been. And also to watch Able Muse sort of bloom into what it's become has been really a delight. So it's great to see you, Alex. Thanks for having me back. Let's see. I'm going to change to gallery so I don't have to see myself. All right. I'll start with a couple of new poems that are not in this book, but we'll move into the book. We'll just do a little opening with a couple of shorties. This one's called Whole. I've been thinking an awful lot about Whitman's old adage, we contain multitudes, and how so many times having many different aspects to the self can seem like a contradiction. People expect you to be one thing, or to, have one aspect, and to have a nuanced understanding of the self is kind of almost considered rebellious, not just of the self, but of everybody else too. So this one is called Whole, W-H-O-L-E. What if all the parts of me, from the ancient to the twee, from the formal to the free, from the jester to the brooder, from the scholar to the woo-woo healer, from the salt water spring to the old forest fire, we're not just integrated, but reconciled. And this one's called, How Is It You? A Lebanese girl, raised Catholic, and a Long Island Ukrainian Jew. One is of the sun, the other of the moon. One of them driven by love, the other is busted in two. All they knew is it always felt a little like deja vu. How is it you came to me and I to you? A nearly true tale is the best we can do. And this one is called In the Turn of a Phrase. So here in Western Colorado, we have a pretty lively poetry community. not necessarily scholarly. We don't have conferences, we have festivals. um, and we have a great respect for our elders. It's kind of, there's an old school kind of understanding, and we lost one of our elders this last month. So this is the poem that I read for my friend Lori at her memorial yesterday. It's called In the Turn of a Phrase, for Lori James. It always seemed to me you emerged from a haze, hid yourself in 1,000 ways, revealed yourself in the turn of a phrase. Those eyes of yours, blue as grief and strangely ablaze. Ah, Montana, oh, Ma James. Brutally true, Montana made. Justice and mercy, your daily clay. It seemed to me you befriended me, 1 foot in the mud, 1 eyebrow raised, rooted in humor and earthly complaint, the way a mantis or an accidental yogi prays. Ah, Montana, oh, Ma James. The back roads and mountain passes and dragons you slayed. I'm not surprised you've left this place in much the same way, emerging from a smoky haze. 1 foot in the grave, 1 glass of wine raised, brutally missed, Aquarius made, planted in joy and earthly praise. With a shawl wrapped round your shoulders, you've stepped out of this maze, struck by beauty, married to truth, and hardly fazed, just another star in the night ablaze. Oh, Montana, ah, Ma James. That's for Lori James. Thank you. Dear brother, I too am still learning to unlearn the childhood 3rd-degree burn, the hollow breath, the relative safety of contempt, the rush to batten down the hatches, the need to hoard the book of matches. I too am still learning to unlearn the fear of dust to dust and ashes, the sudden lie that serves no purpose, the lie that swears that you are useless. I too am still learning to unlearn the curse of the certain, to reverse the locked and loaded, to suspend the ugly motive, the corrupt and the corroded. I too am still learning to unlearn the wrought iron word, the rock solid cure. My brother, in the mirror of the triggered, in the glass of the disfigured, in the dream of the imprisoned, in the stories of reflection, are the remnants of revision, are the cousins of correction, are the sages and the saplings and the burnings of the learnings, are the blessings of the waters, are the curtains slowly parting, are the rivers in their turning, are the ripples of unlearning. Okay, now, wise to the west. These two. The fire that burns across the west and sears into your thumping chest. The beloved friend to anger wed, who put a gun against his head. The beautiful one who lost her breast. The father pretending to remember. The basil plant that went to seed. The cat that never shed its fears. The holiday struck down by disaster. The invisible internal bleed. The cut, the clot, the low-lying river, the annoying eternal dreamer, the corrupt and smiling preacher. These too are the teacher. An act of possibility. To open up the heart may be difficult as a cliche and might well be an act of possibility, the hand of generosity, a sacred new geometry, a brave new world of pitch and luminosity. Here's one. When I wrote it, I wasn't sure what to make of it. And, you know, you sometimes write those poems and I'm still not quite sure what to make of it, although I think I'm okay with it. It's called The Feminine Principle. The feminine principle that underlies the mind has no interest in why a moment becomes magical. And yet it should be said, the feminine principle that underlies the mind is of the earth and far more wed to what within the magical is tangible, dynamical, and ultimately whole and enigmatical. You see, I'm struggling with these themes of wholeness and integration, and I think it's something that collectively we really should be looking at. I think we've kind of learned how to sort of, you know, compartmentalize a little bit too effectively. I think what the arts teach us is this whole idea of integration, not just integration, but reconciliation. In the womb, you will begin to learn the ways of water, although its warmth may lead you to its mysteries, its formlessness and changing forms, its seeds and beads and underbellies, its freezes and complexities, its fogs and rippling memories, its whisperings and crashings through. But what is strangely beautiful is what the water teaches you is sordidly or splendidly or depressingly up to you. All right, this one is called Rhyme, What Good Is It? And it's dedicated to Joshua Megan, who did a workshop about a year ago that he called it Rhyme, What Good Is It? And I mentioned my local sort of poetry community here, and they're very anti-rhyme, and they just don't get it. So I'm kind of accustomed to sort of defending, you know, meter and rhyme. And I think that I mean, a lot of my poems going to do that by trying to show, not tell, but this one just kind of comes right out to it. It's called Rhyme, What Good Is It? Well, I wouldn't want to kiss it. It's illicit. It's illegal, said the scholar, said the weasel, said the anger it inspires. Said the shady and the slanted. They are sick. They are twisted, those who bow down and kiss it. Quote the fable with a flourish. It's okay if it's implicit. It's the garlic in the biscuit. They are fascists. They are wicked, those who stoop to revere it. Goddess bless the rhyme driven, said the vowel, said the riven, said the salt in the season and the bolt in the lightning, said the shift in rhythm. It's all good, it's all play, said the butter, said the bread, said the body, said the dead, said the pollen of the hour, said the grain in the word, and its weird little power, juxtaposed and engendered, paired up or neatly slaughtered, slammed shut or long remembered, knotted up or granddaughtered, from candlestick to stream, how life is but a dream. Thank you. Thank you all. And I'll close with a little poem called Deconstruction. The chickadee is all about truth. The finch is a token. The albatross is always an omen. The kestrel is mental. The lark is luck. The grouse is dance. The goose is quest. The need for speed is given the peregrine, and the dove has been blessed with the feminine. The quail is word and culpability. The crane is the dean of poetry. The swift is the means to agility. The waxwing, mere civility. The sparrow, a nod to working class nobility. The puffin's the brother of laughter and prayer. The starling, the student of Baudelaire. The mockingbird is the sound of redress. The grackle, the uncle of excess. The flicker is rhythm. The ostrich is earth. The bluebird, a simple symbol of mirth. The oriole is the fresh start. The magpie, prince of the dark arts. The swallow is home and protection. The vulture, the priest of purification. The heron, a font of self-reflection. The swisher belongs to the fairy realm. Resourcefulness is the cactus wren. The pheasant is sex. The chicken is egg. The eagle is free. The canary, the bringer of ecstasy. The martin is peace. The stork is release. The swan, the mother of cool discretion. The loon, the watery voice of the moon. The owls, the keeper of secrets, grief, and fresh fallen snow. And the crow has the bones of the ancestral soul. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Wendy. Everyone can unmute. Applaud.
John.
Thank you all. We have some time for questions and answers, but I'm going to take the host prerogative and ask one. But I did think it was wonderful how different and distinct these voices, these poems are. That's a pleasure in having this triple book launch. So I'm delighted. I'm thrilled. And the question I would like to ask, and it may be a kind of compound question, is for each poet, what drew you to write in meter, rhyme, forms, and what poets called to you, guided you, led you along, or were helpful to you in the process? I mean, as poets, not necessarily people you knew. You might have known them, but it could be Thomas Hardy, for instance. It could be Emily Dickinson. And anyone can go first. Wendy, Nicole, Janis.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I was going to say that it was really chutzpah that drew me to writing sonnets. I read that wonderful book by Rebecca Faust, Paradise Drive, which is all sonnets. And I was thinking about this project, and I thought, well, why don't I try that? But it turned out to be very helpful, as you know, to have a container, to have constraints. It's like having to evacuate from your house, and you can only take what fits in one box. The formal poems I think are a roadmap, so that I'm not totally lost in the creative wilderness. So I got hooked.
Yeah, I think hooked is definitely the way I felt when I sort of started to uncover something about language that was rhythmic and surprising. And I was a very quiet child. I didn't really have access to my voice. And so I listened a lot, and I would listen to people in conversation, and I was counting syllables and rhythm and beats and things of this nature. And it wasn't until many years later that I realized what I was doing. But I wasn't so much paying attention to what was being said, although what was being said, mattered. But it seemed sort of secondary that there was something about words themselves, that this sort of magical intonation, and that was like so musical to hear language. And then of course I became interested in, when I was younger, I started reading early Yeats. The Stolen Child, I think, was one of the first poems. Come away, O stolen child, to the waters and the wild, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. That was just magic and pure joy to me. And I loved that you kind of never knew what was coming. And this whole notion of just being surprised by the way that sound and meaning and a whole bunch of other sort of aspects come together and create something that's just inexplicable. It was just pure magic to me. I was also influenced by Emily and Millay, Walter de la Mare. Is it Lamar or Lemaire? Does anybody know? I never know.
It's Delamaire. Walter Delamaire. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The Listeners, that was one that really got me when I was young. And yeah, like Janis said, I was hooked. There was something about it that it took me a long time actually to come out as a poet, years later, but I was writing, privately and on my own for all of my childhood and young adulthood.
In terms of writing in form, I just know that my free verse was garbage, so no one wanted it. And looking back at it, just like it wasn't clicking, nothing was clicking. And then I started writing, let's say in syllabics, and that was kind of a gateway. And then reading poetry in journals that I admire. So I would, whether I was reading the Raintown Review or Measure or Able Muse or Mezzo Camille, you're exposed to so many poets, and then it just, I don't know, there was something about, even though it was a challenge and it seemed really scary at first, like, why would you want to write a sonnet if you could just write it in free verse? Why give yourself that, you're so encumbered? But then it became like, I definitely need the fence. And, especially if you're dealing with difficult subject matter, it's like Marilyn Nelson or Rena Espaillat would say, you need a box, you need some sturdy vessel to put something dangerous in. And I think of it kind of like a boat. Like if we're all going on this journey together, you have to have a sturdy craft to get over the rough waters. And also I like puzzles, and so the more twisty and turny a form is, like it becomes like a fun challenge. And yeah, I do write some free verse poems, but hardly any in the book are free verse. And there is something so magical about rhythm and rhyme. I mean, from the time of childhood, being in love with Shel Silverstein and Dr. Seuss and the Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight was played like incessantly in my home. So things like that was just like a magical trance that you'd be in. So being able to say, well, how am I going to use this rhythm or rhyme? It was appealing. Yeah, the discipline I definitely appreciate, not having any fence or guidelines. It's like, well, you want me to choose from just all the words? Like, that's too, it's too terrifying. It's way too open.
Those are wonderful answers. I'm glad that the event is being recorded. I really like what each of you said. And we have room for other questions. So if you want to pose a question, just unmute, and if people talk at the same time, we'll sort it out.
Nicole, I just want to congratulate you for taking back one of Petrarch's main images for women. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of what you said.
I said thank you for taking back for womanhood one of Petrarch's recurring obsessive images. The trebuchet. Oh my God. Love it.
My husband was very excited that there was a poem for him that had a trebuchet in it.
Well, I have done a translation with trebuchet in it, so it's a popular word right now.
I have a question, and it could really be addressed to anyone, but I'll address it to the three readers. It's a basic question. Okay, so when we write poems, we revise and we revise and we revise. But then how do you know when you've revised enough and it's officially done, D-O-N-E, done?
So how do you know when a poem's done?
Yeah.
Well, I bring it to my writing group that meets every like 4 to 6 weeks in person when there's not a pandemic, on Zoom when there is. And if I go over it with them and then I tweak it and I bring my draft back, if no one has any gripes and I feel like it's ready, but if I feel like there's still a pebble in my shoe, like there's something I'm being lazy about or something that's not something I thought was totally clear, and they're like, no, we didn't know, that's not what we got out of it all. But, there were poems in this manuscript even that were getting tweaked, for one reason or another, like right up till the time it was ready to go to the printers, things that I thought, oh, this was done. But the team was so great in saying, well, oh, we took this line to mean this. And I thought, oh, well, no, that's not what I meant. And I definitely want to change it. I want absolute clarity. Just what, and also I think it's great to run it by an audience. Like if you go to an open mic and you get a good response versus kind of a flat root beer response. And but what does Ted Kuzer say? A poem draft is a lot like a petri dish. Like set it aside for a while, and the longer you let it sit, the more stinky fungus will emerge. So I do like to set it aside for a while and then come back to it so I can see it with new eyes, because if you let it sit long enough, you might say, who even wrote this poem? But then you can see, because otherwise I'm too close. But I definitely get a group of other writers to look at it, because you're too close to it. You're not objective. And also my writing group does not let me get away with anything. Like they're lovely people, but they don't let me get away with stuff at all. So I know that they'll be honest. They'll be like, no, you can do better than that, or this is confusing. You got to change it up. So, but I think everyone's different. So we'll hear from Wendy and Janice.
It's interesting about endings. There's a whole book. I think it was Paul Muldoon who wrote, the end of the poem, because it's so crucial to a poem how we end it. And when you've got a terrific poem going and it just sort of fizzles, it's a failure. It doesn't feel, you just know it, that it just something, the poet ran out of steam or couldn't figure out how to surprise themselves. And so we're not surprised, or it might end, in a predictable way, or it might sort of leave you in a place where it's just unsatisfying. But the few times that I have experienced what I would call a surprising, ending, that's when I feel that I've, really hit it. It just feels like, you took a blind shot and the basketball went right, nothing but hoop kind of thing. Like it's never going to be what you think the ending is supposed to be. It's like Robert Frost said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. The ending should come as though it feels inevitable, yet not predictable, if that makes sense. And you kind of just, it's an intuitive thing. And if the ending isn't right, I'll just, just like Nicole said, just keep it around, let it, sit, let it marinate. And then in another completely different time in your life or in another mood, suddenly something will come to the fore. Yeah, it's a lot easier to start a poem than to end it.
Sometimes I have to chop off what I thought the ending was,
Right.
like, am I tying it up too neatly with a bow?
Yeah.
That's where my writing group's good about advising me too. They're like, well, it's going to end a stanza earlier. Like you're explaining too much, or it's a little too much like end scene. Like it's just over, a little too neat. Maybe leave the reader feeling a little uncomfortable or not clueless and wondering, but just there could be more mystery.
I agree with Nicole. My writing group, a couple of whom are on the call today, are enormously helpful. They're very skilled poets and very discerning, and their critiques are great. But even when I was preparing for this reading, I was thinking, what if I had used that word? So I don't know is ever truly done.
Well, I can give you an example, Mark, of like the revision that can happen sometimes all the way to the end. Like when I read the list poem, when you look at it on the page, it has numbers for all of them. And I found that after a while, when I would read it in front of people, I would, first I would say the numbers like 1 because this, 2 because it, and then somehow around number 4 or 5, I would just stop saying the numbers and think, oh, I messed up. I didn't say the numbers. But then the revision was like, okay, when you read this for people, you don't have to, just don't read the numbers. It's okay to have it on the page. So as I read it for people, if any poem, if I find myself kind of subconsciously like leaving lines out or making changes, then I'll think, all right, well, that's the direction this poem wants to go in.
Thank you.
Has the question?
Yeah, I have a comment. I recently was doing a reading for, actually I was subbing for Barbara Sorensen who had a problem and she couldn't read, and it was for Able Muse. And the host said something really interesting. She said, because Barbara Sorensen basically writes in free verse and the other two poets were formal. And she said, the host said, we're going to be reading today formal poems. They're formal both in structure and intention. And when there are poems that are, although they're not completely formal, there's a formality in there and that there's intention. So it's not just a lot of words or a lot of ideas or a lot of images strung together. There's an idea that follows through and is built on. And I think the poets today did wonderful work showing that, illustrating that formal structure, but also formal in intention, not just, oh, that's an interesting rhyme or that's a clever repetition, but yes, that's the right thing to do now. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you. That's interesting. I don't know if I've ever heard of that before, like not just being formal in terms of structure, but formal in terms of intention. Maybe everyone else has heard of this phrase, but not me. I don't know.
It was new to me too.
Formal and
yeah, I kind of agree
This
in the
one.
sense that it changed too and went from Nicole to Janis to Wendy, and the formality changed throughout. So it was this really serious, you know, poems that made me cry with Nicole, to poems with Janis that were like personable, that were just hitting, and then the humor of Wendy. It was just an amazing flow of poetry today for that.
I'd say that the architecture of a poem is the way it's put together. It isn't the rhymes or the rhyme scheme or anything like that, but there is a progression, a logical progression, or even an irrational progression, but one that makes sense, as dreams make sense. Even though they don't seem rational at the time, there's a reason that these things are coming together.
Yeah, I call it, I really like that, that expression of formal intention, because, you know, I often say, you know, some of my best friends write free verse. But, and I'm actually kind of not quite formal enough really for the formal kind of world. I'm kind of more formal-ish. But I think it's the formal intention that keeps what I call kind of the spine or the backbone. Like, people talk architecture, but it's also sort of like, if you think about any living, you know, mammal, what would they be without, you know, a backbone? There's got to be some kind of structure. I mean, it doesn't necessarily even have to really be meter or rhyme or, you know, a fixed form, but some kind of structure that allows it to support the argument or the presentation. You know, every poem is a presentation. So, you know, to me, I always feel a little bit disappointed when a poem doesn't have some kind of formal thought behind it, some kind of, you know, backbone.
I like to think I can hear it snap shut. It's like it's almost a physical sound. And I especially enjoy poems when 3 lines before it's like, this is going to snap shut soon. And when it does, there are a few things in the universe that good.
Right.
That's how you know it's a poem is done, Mark, when it snaps shut. You get that good rhyming couplet. It's like I understand what you mean though. Like, you could feel it just like gelling toward the end. It snaps shut. I like that phrase.
You know,
I also really
like
what Wendy's talking about with like the poems. You need some kind of like organizing principle, even if it's not written in a received form. Like, how is it structured? Is it? I'm not a fan of poems that are just word salad and that don't really seem to pay much attention to like lineation. And is there some kind of organizing principle? Is it in a form on the page that's easily digestible? Because, and you know, unlike, let's say, a song where you're going to listen to it but you're not going to look at the lyrics, you're looking at the white space, you're looking at the poem on the page sometimes. Not today as we're reading aloud, but you hopefully will be looking at them on the page.
There was a fellow in the 1960s that went around to all the universities speaking, and his name was Marshall McLuhan, and he pretty much had everything down to 4 words: freedom within a form.
What I like very much about all 3 poets was the sense of intimacy. The thematic of the 3 poets was different. Sometimes the intimacy was a hard intimacy, sometimes just a gentle looking over the shoulder. But there was this very easy sense of honest intimacy in all 3 that I really liked.
Thank you.
You know, I was just going to say, thank goodness for venues like Able Muse and others, because this sort of provocative end part of this discussion. Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely can carry that banner that Wendy mentioned, being formalish, but I certainly don't feel like a metrical master, right? like some other like Timothy Steele, but I mean, it's better now than it used to be, but there are still, I get a lot of editors that are like, wow, I really like that, but we don't tend to put you right. They don't want the poems that snap shut. They want the stuff that trails off or is reflective of the postmodern fragmentation of our time, whatever that means. So how wonderful and fortunate we are to have poets like this and venues like Able Muse to keep that kind of aesthetic alive, and to show that the form can be flexible too, right? It doesn't mean that you're bound. You haven't like taken up the chains of some ancient slavery, right? By doing that. So thank you all.
Well, I think we've just about wrapped it up. That was a wonderful Q&A session. I loved it. Alex, did you want to say something before we break?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, everyone, for this lovely afternoon of poetry and discussions, which was I found very stimulating. Thank you, Wendy, Nicole, Janis. You did it. Was just a wonderful reading from all three of you. And so, like John mentioned, and I mentioned earlier, we'll be having some kind of a couple of months hiatus for the holidays, and then we'll resume after that. But just check the newsletters, and you will know when. Which also brings me to the links I posted in the chat, where you will find all the links to other books from today's readers, and also about the forthcoming issue of Able Muse, which will be here in a month or so. So be sure to subscribe not to miss the wonderful poets who will be in that issue, and also writers and essayists. So thank you all, and I wish you all a great weekend, and or what is left of it.
Thank
Happy
you, everyone. It was
holidays.
so good.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
See you Thursday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
For tuning in.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Janis.
Bye, Alex. Thank you, John.
Oh, thanks, Janice. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
John.
Nicole.
Great
Perfect.
hosting
Nice-
job, John.
Nice to meet
Yes.
you.
Yes. Very nice.